and using, I think at that time I used 4,000 euros a day on Meta.
So you're pumping out 400,000 euros a day on Meta. So you're high-fiving, you thinking you got the business of the year. What happened?
Yeah, and then I got some numbers back from an accountant.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to another unedited conversation with me, Ed Gould. So the conversation that you're going to hear today is one that is vital if you make money online. So if you're a marketeer, if you're a brand, if you're a CMO, if you're an FD, and you derive income and revenue from online sales, this is a vital conversation to listen to. Why? Because my guest, Fredrik Boysen from Profit Metrics, who created Profit Metrics, is going to talk to us about the things that are going wrong in that space. What I love about the conversation, because I've been listening to it back, as I always do before I talk to you guys, what I love about the conversation, I am a creative director and I get involved with businesses that are doing all sorts of things, and many of them are very, very much geared towards online sales. And increasingly, we're having conversations in those businesses around the money I spend on marketing, the money I'm spending on online advertising, what am I actually making back? And the traditional model for looking at that is based around revenue. And what's the problem with that? Well, if you run an online business or you're a marketeer or an agency that's in charge of that, the number of different factors that can influence the profit margin in that are huge. So your cost per acquisition that you based on a revenue model is completely wrong. Why do we know this? Well, Frederik will give you a very good example of why. When he started a business, one of the biggest businesses in Denmark for online sales, that virtually went bankrupt. And it went bankrupt because he was basing his intelligence and his knowledge on what Meta and Facebook were telling him, rather than looking into the detail of it. So Frederik and a team at Profit Metrics have created something called PROAS, which is a measurement that allows you to look at your performance in a different way. He also gets into topics, so listen on, for things around people, great advice he's had from other people down the line, and also how he's actually tackling a global expansion of his business. So if you're a marketeer, which you should be if it's a marketing podcast, or maybe you're the FD, which you should be because your marketeer should have passed this on to you, this is a really important conversation. As usual, I invite you to feedback, get in touch, and you can do so through our social channels. And if you like and subscribe, which is always a great thing to do, we can share the love ever wider. So, I think that's it. Let's sit back, relax, and get ready for another unedited conversation. Okay, so it's a big welcome to Frederik, and I'm going to let Frederik, as is always the way, I'm going to ask him to introduce himself. Frederik, tell us who you are, where you're from. Give us the little intro.
I'm Frederik. I'm from Copenhagen, Denmark. So, in a business aspect, I've been an entrepreneur since I was 22. I'm 40 now, so a long time. E-commerce owner primarily, built up a lot of companies. Some went good, some went not as good. I've had different startups in insurance and consulting and so on. And today I am the CEO and founder of Profit Metrics. That is a Danish company, but we are remote. So we have people all over the world.
And this is what we want to get into because your colleague or one of your team, Nick, who I know from long ago, contacted me and said, look, I'm working with this guy. He's really interesting. He's doing something a little bit differently. So give us a little starter for 10 on what the premise of Profit Metrics really is and why it exists.
Yeah, so essentially I set out to try and give more transparency into marketing, actually figuring out what is the real ROI or return on marketing. And it's not the return everyone knows, as in we are focused on e-commerce, retail. Return have somehow in the past been shifted out with revenue. And return and revenue is definitely not the same. So what we try to give is that transparency into what did you make in return, aka real profit, and what did you put in? So when I put X in, how much do I get back on profit? So it's apples to apples and not bananas to apples like revenue, which is totally hard to actually figure out what that margin is on that revenue when you don't make the same margin.
Let's start with getting into a bit of the detail about what the difference is between revenue and profit in this context and how you go about measuring that.
Yeah. So the way the market until some time back when I started Profit Metrics, or generally have measured the return on the marketing, is they've taken the revenue and they have taken some kind of average margin they have gotten. When it have last been calculated, nobody really knows, but they know that they are making 40% or 30%, and then they know if we're making 30%, whenever we put in one euro a pound, we need at least 3 times back just to break even, and then they put some kind of margin on top of that, and then they say, okay, if we get 5 back on revenue, we will make money. But not all products make the same margin, and maybe you're giving free shipping, you can do discounts, you can do all sort of things that change that margin. So why use an average? Why not go in and say, and even on that revenue, most marketers don't know if it's including VAT or not, and there's a pretty big difference in that number
and
of
which
some
region it's being sold in and how it's getting there. And
exactly. So the point is actually to get back a number, a gross profit number on an order and a conversion. So seeing what did the customer pay after discounts? What was the VAT? Did the customer pay something in shipping, or did you give free shipping? Because then it's a zero in the income, but you still have the expense of sending that out with DHL or UPS. It still costs you something, you just don't have any income. Look up the cost of goods. So what did the products actually cost? Payment providers, they take a percentage. PayPal, for example, extremely expensive. And if it's large orders, most people don't think about it. They also take a percentage of the VAT. So
and
on the
you've got
bottom
varying
line,
gateways and payment methods.
Exactly, varying shipping methods. So sometimes you're sending it to pickup points, sometimes it's private delivery, sometimes it's it's barbells or protein powders, or sometimes it's capsules that is light. It costs different to send it out. And that calculation you need to calculate, and then you have to send that into marketing platforms like if it was Google. So you see what profit did we get, what ad spend, because suddenly then everything gets transparent. We call it POAS, profit on ad spend instead. And it's essentially just to differentiate it from return on ad spend, because return and profit were supposed to be the same thing. If you look at a P&L, return is the profit. But in the way we measure marketing, it suddenly became revenue. So we try to differentiating it as calling it POAS, profit on ad spend, to make sure you see this is the POAS, and then talking more about ROAS as not return on ad spend, but actually revenue on ad spend, because it's still an important KPI. All the platforms work on that KPI, but knowing that profit and being able to compare apples to apples, that is what really makes a difference in seeing, are these ads, are these campaigns bringing us profit, or are they wasting us money? And then you can allocate from that transparency.
And so in the past, this would have been a hard thing to do because access to the data from across like, what was the challenge for say I'm the FD of and just to contextualize this, anything that's being sold online, this is related to. If there's a transaction going through digitally, this can be relevant to. But I guess in the old world, before what you guys are doing, everything, there's a financial director that might be digging into this that doesn't have access to certain centers of information. And then on the other side, you've got a marketing team that doesn't have access to other areas. So what are the barriers for a business doing this themselves, or why hasn't it? Why has it taken till you've come along to change this?
I think it's a little bit like you say, it's siloed. So margins, what do we pay for products, is living somewhere in procurement, purchasing, financial departments. Then you have the marketers who have access to certain data. So that data have just not been available. It has been so much easier when you set up tracking. in a conversion pixel or something like that. The revenue is already there in a data layer. That can already be pushed. So it's so easy to just say, okay, we send that to Meta, we send that to Google, and then we have that number. But actually getting the profit in has not been easy. And then the next thing is, let's say we could get the profit there, then the competitors or customers could maybe see on that thank you page what you're making. So that's like a no-go. So it's the way we do it is we send it in server side in through the API, so it's always hidden, because this is confidential data, and you can always argue, do customers actually go in or competitors go in and buy 20 times to see the profit margins on your products? Probably not, but it's just something when you land in the board meeting, you would say, hey, nobody should be able to see these margins. And of course, that's what gets it to become more complicated, because you actually need to feed it into the platforms and exchange the revenue for profit. And then you have to get that data from financial teams over to marketing to send it in. That is like the structure of it.
As a creative director, I'm listening to you going, oh God, that sounds like a pain in the ass. You know,
exactly.
and that's so people don't bother. So then they revert to, hey, we've done great revenue, boss. And then the wheels come off. So that's given, dear listener, wherever you are, hopefully that's given you a bit of a picture about what we're talking about today. But I want to take a moment to think about how you got here. So what was the story? What inspired this? And why should we believe that you understand what you're talking about, Frederik? Where's this come from? What's the origin story?
So in my last eCommerce business, I was really, really scaling fast. It was around 2015. It was where Facebook just came about, and it was still like this branding play. I had really figured out to do that direct selling like everyone is doing on Meta today, but it wasn't common at that point. I was invited over, did the first Scandinavian case study with Facebook, as they were called at that time. And I think we had 400,000 people on our newsletter list in little Denmark, where we are only 6 million people. So that was a big part of the population.
So they loved you.
They loved me. It went really, really fast. I was scaling, and I thought I have everything under control. I was hitting my target ROAS, which I calculated. I knew I needed this much money back every time I use euro, how much revenue I needed back, and I was just counting on that. And whenever I saw an ad hitting that, I was just scaling and using. I think at that time I used 3,000-4,000 euros a day on Meta.
So you're pumping out 300,000-400,000 euros a day on Meta, and it was being validated.
No, 3,000-4,000 euros a day.
Okay.
But it was a lot at that time, because it was.
Well, we're talking a while ago. So by over a year, you must have been one of the big spenders on that, on full stop.
At least in eCommerce, because it was not there yet for eCommerce. So
you're high-fiving. You're thinking you've got the business of the year. What happened?
Yes, sir. And and then I got some numbers back from an accountant, and there was something weird going on. They didn't really add up, so I hired another accounting agency to go over these numbers, just to make sure these numbers were correct, because I was used to getting a P&L every three months, and it was looking great, and I could just keep on scaling. I then, in that period, I didn't have any numbers for 3 to 4 months. And I was just keeping on scaling. I was hitting those targets. Those targets were great. And then
spend.
Why not scale when you can? This were just a missed opportunity if I didn't. So I was scaling and got those numbers back, and I thought I was in a big plus, but suddenly I was in a big minus. I couldn't understand what the hell is going on here.
Okay.
I went in digging. I did a lot of problems there, but a lot of mistakes. But one of the mistakes was that I had calculated a target ROAS, which almost any e-commerce retailer do. They say we need 5 back in revenue or 6 back in revenue because we have this margin. We have gotten that from finance. But that changed over time. Price changes that you buy the products in for, you sell different products. I was marketing, for example, on Meta or Facebook, as it was called, a lot of high margin products. But what I didn't calculate in was suddenly I was also selling perfumes, electronic products. People clicked on that product and they were certainly giving that revenue in, but they bought the more expensive product, but with a lower margin. So that calculation, I was actually scaling. extremely
Okay.
unprofitable. So I knew I had this problem, and I had to act fast because it was a lot of money I was losing. The problem was I knew something were profitable, but I also now knew something weren't. But because I was measuring on this, I only had the revenue available. I couldn't see what was profitable or not. So the only thing I could do was to do like this: turn down the ad spend. That landed a huge cash flow problem with me. Suddenly the sales didn't come in. I had a lot of people. I had a quite big team. And it actually ended so bad, so I went bankrupt. I couldn't save that company.
Are you actually, you had to close the whole company?
I had to close it, but I was really lucky that I found an investor that believed in me and believed in he could see the errors and mistakes I've made, but the business weren't the problem. It was more the measurement and actually knowing your numbers.
And this is the nub of it, isn't it? You scale a business, but you're basing it on sand. It's on a very unfirm standing, and one mistake and it wobbles like hell.
And it goes fast. It goes really, really fast. And but he believed in the idea, so we brought up that bankruptcy, made agreements with all the creditors, so they kept on, and all the customers, no customer were harmed. The site went on as it was. That was very important for me. But as we went over these things and the problems, that was just where I was thinking, why are we actually using that revenue when I definitely now know that it's not the same on all orders I'm selling? Why don't we use the real profit up against ad spend? Because then I don't have to do that calculation back, which I now know is totally wrong in some cases. And also, the data is there. I have my cost prices. I have the sales on a daily level from my e-commerce store. Why do I have to wait 3 months to get a P&L back where there's always a little bit of errors or things that change, and it's super hard to actually read because it depends on how the account actually set up the P&L? Why can't I click on a button and see how much profit did I make today or the last week after ad spend and fixed cost? So I know exactly how hard I can scale. Am I too aggressive or am I too conservative? There was nothing out there. So I hired a consultant to build like a very primitive tool, and it just changed everything. Suddenly I could see, okay, this ad is making me money. Let's scale that. Okay, this is actually, I'm losing. People are not buying that product. I'm doing the marketing because the margin is not the same. Scale that down. So I could just really, really scale the ad spend button in a controlled
way
and a profitable way. And it changed the company. It became not as big, but it became healthy. We got good salaries. We were making a profit. So I thought, okay, this is maybe the market don't have as big problem as I had, but this is something everyone is doing it the same way as I did. So they must have or be missing that transparency that I didn't have. So I put up the company for sale, and we're lucky to make an exit on that one. And then I took all that money, invested it into profit metrics, and went out and made it into a business. And here we are. That's a little bit over 5 years since I went full-time in it.
You know, it takes a story like that to, pressure makes diamonds, don't they say? And when
I know my numbers now.
When
I know my numbers.
Hits the fan, you really learn the number. You really have to dig into it.
Yeah.
But there's people who will be listening to this that are depending on other people to be thinking about those numbers. They might not be as analytical as you. They might not be thinking, and they might be working with agencies. They might be working with consultants. So, that's why this conversation's important, but it's also important for people to think about where does real value come from? Because we're talking about an industry. If you talk about Meta and you talk about LinkedIn advertising, there's, they're wonderful things, but there's also some big question marks around the measurement. And obviously they want you to believe everything's wonderful. They're not going to give you the exact picture. You don't need to be a genius to think that it's in their interests to present wonderful data. So take the power into your own hands and really dig into those. Right. Let's pause for a second. We've got the why it came about. Where are we now? So what you've given us a great case study of your own, but what types of businesses are using this now? How's it working? And where are you at?
Yeah, so I think we have almost customers in all bigger countries in the world. We are a team of 34 people. We are remote first, so they are all over the world. We, of course, have some in the UK, we have in Canada, and then they are just spread all over Europe. We are still a smaller team here located in Copenhagen, but we are remote first, so we are hiring for talent and not location. And we have clients from newly started e-commerce business to some of the biggest one in the UK. You probably know Liberty London could be a good example. We have Intersport and some really,
so it's
really
everything
large
from
players.
those big brands where you're working direct with those teams through to working through agencies, working through other consultants, etc. So where do you see the path? You've got all of what I'm interested in as a creative is as a creative director and someone that pairs strategy with creative a lot is patterns. So when you look at all of that and you think about how am I going to scale my business? So you're talking about helping other people's marketing. When you think about your own problem, where do you see those patterns? Where do you see organizations, and there's probably people listening that might be in them, that derive the most value from this sort of activity?
So if we go a little bit back, my strategy was, I was thinking like, people are doing this revenue-based optimization. This is what they're measuring on. So before I can sell a tool to anyone, I need to try and make change. And I thought the easiest way was essentially to go in and just kick as much on that ROAS as possible. ROAS is the enemy, not that it is, but the way we are using ROAS in a wrong way is the enemy. And then this is POAS. POAS is transparency. So I took the trademark on that, and that is then have been my marketing play of getting that out in the world. So all the companies know that, or agencies talk about it, and it's really getting out there now. And maybe they don't know profit metrics, but they know, hey, POAS, we need a POAS tool. We need something here. We go in and search who comes up. Profit metrics have the trademark. They pop up as number one. And that has been my way of trying to change, because the majority of the market is still doing the old way.
It's a behavioral change challenge. It's a global behavioral change challenge, and you're dealing with markets that are at different maturities in how they're actually working with e-commerce. And you've got some markets and segments that are going to be just getting going and scaling, and you've got a really great opportunity to get in there at ground level. And you've got others like the US and the UK that think they know everything, and you've got to really change that behavior. I mean, I sit in meetings with very high-powered experts that will not understand this and will be very doggedly sticking to what they were taught 10 years ago, 15, 20. You know,
it's always easier to do what you did yesterday.
Ago.
And that was like trying to change that. That was an important thing, and we started out around Corona time. So that was in e-commerce. That should have been the best possible time, because there were so many orders. It was just growing. But essentially, for us, we had a great start anyway. But essentially, for us, the big problem for e-commerce businesses was not making money, because all the marketing spaghetti they sent to the wall, that just stuck. Everything worked. Their problem was getting enough products in to sell, because everything they had in stock sold. But then we went into like a post-corona where everyone have hired like crazy, and they just didn't adjust for it. So suddenly the market were hit and the stores open. People wanted to go out and do live events and meet people. And suddenly there wasn't the same volume in the market of transaction in e-commerce, and they actually hit a pretty hard time. I know UK have had a rough time, and that was where it helped the change, because suddenly there was a focus on it.
People listen more, and I think that when you don't have all the answers and things aren't going your way, and this is, if anyone's feeling like that's listening to it, it doesn't matter. When you're succeeding, you won't people don't listen to anyone, and that was my
story. That was my story.
All messes up. So, but I can definitely speak to the I can speak acutely to the UK market. We're still in a quite suppressed market where there's a lack of confidence and that's playing through. But there's interesting things that are happening at a political and social level. You're feeling things moving a little bit more, both from a community point of view, and things are shifting. But and hopefully that then manifests itself in market value. But I think you're bang on. It's an education piece where people need to be receptive.
The boards also changed there, because suddenly, all the way from the top, suddenly the down the lines, they said, we need to focus on profitability. You need to figure out that we are not wasting ad spend because we don't have this money. Budgets were taken away, but they still needed to hit the revenue numbers. And that was where I think the biggest push in actually looking at profitability came from, that it was a need of it. There was a need in market to actually push towards profitability.
I think in my career, there's been peaks and troughs, and maybe people recognize those. You get these trends where people lurch towards big themes like measurement or CSR, and then within those, you've got these opportunities that come up. And the opportunity as a global organization, or if you think as those are happening at different points in different places. So there's always going to be someone somewhere out there that is waiting to be receptive and is open to these sorts of messages. I guess the challenge for you is how you really democratize access to the information in the first instance. And even if someone didn't buy your platform, even though it is your platform, the principles of thinking about this are important no matter what you do and in any way. So how are you taking that to market? How's it playing now? And is it only you that can have this conversation? Have you got other people out there? Are we baking it into university education? I mean, what are the opportunities, do you think, over the next 5 years?
I'm hearing the pause in the big tech companies out there, the really, really big one, also the American ones, internally, how they talk. But our way to market was through the marketing agencies, because I don't believe that POAS is only used for the marketing spend. I think that POAS is a concept of looking at contribution margin, looking at the business and so on. But beside cost of goods in an e-commerce business, the biggest expense is the marketing, and that's what's often driving the business. So that was like the problem I wanted to try and fix the first. And if you look at, there is of course internal teams in some larger companies, but the general market of e-commerce has an agency that is in charge of that. Yeah. So it's either them who consult or do some of the strategy, or actually is active and doing the performance marketing. So getting to them and getting them convinced about, this is much, much better. That was our way in, because they already have the trust of that e-commerce business, or that owner, or the e-commerce manager or CFO, of using their ad spend in those channels. So we partner up with agencies, and the agencies utilize our software and they recommend it to their clients, and we then meet their clients and set it up together with the clients. And that has worked very, very well.
I think when you're a force for good in an industry that has quite a lot of challenges, I mean, if you think about agency world at the moment, with the impact of AI, with a drive down on exactly what you just talked about, global business looking for profit and margin. Also, if you're sat listening and you're in an agency in the UK, you've got the added negativity of being quite costly compared to some of the other providers. So we're competing in every direction, in every way. And anything that can help validate and lift your proposition to prove that the effectiveness of what you're doing means something to the business, not in your language, not in the way I would talk, we got loads of clicks and likes. It's not, that's great. And I love all that. Great. It's, but we have to talk the business that the actual business is paying us, talk the language that they talk. And this principle and this idea is one part of that. But if you expand out what you're talking about, Frederik, it's also about an alertness to the realities of bottom line business that I think agencies sometimes are a little bit remote from. And we've certainly done a lot of work in. I've been connected to enough failures to know
No, but it
how
is
to make a success now. So
when we look at the agency market, as I see it, I'm not an agency, but how I see it is, it's a search for staying relevant, because we know it's heading in an AI world. Bidding is taking away. Agency, my prediction is it's becoming much more consultant, a strategic advisor for the business, and it's going that route. And how do you do that? That is by getting very deep into the business. And I think that agencies have been a silo. They have been an extension of the marketing team or somebody they have hired. They have no interaction with the finances in the business. So what we are trying to bring to this partnership between the client and the agency is,
I love it,
alignment, transparency,
and it
working on
them.
those. Yeah.
It lifts them so much. And I think one of the, when I think about, as we bring on new team members in, when I've got my agency hat on, not my podcast host hat on, but when we're sat there thinking about how the hell we've been here 30 years as an agency, how the hell are we going to be here for another 30? Or how are we going to expedite the value and the effort that's been put into this business? And for the last sort of 5 years since COVID, really, we've been having this conversation and changing how we work to try and get our clients to understand what real value is. And what is most amazing about this, and if you're listening to this as a marketing leader in brand, you're part of the problem as well, because what's basically happening is you're not letting us have that conversation with you about what real value is in some instances. And in the same sentence, you're saying, where's the value? And really, that's about being much more open with the people that we bring around us to have success. And that's why I love talking to you about this. It's why I love having very robust conversations. And we do have robust conversations about bottom line with our clients. And we're a big challenge for agency and for us and for all organizations is that relevance piece and how we change our product set to meet that. And I was on a call with a global marketing lead this morning on the way in, while eating a cheeky McDonald's breakfast on the way, which was very naughty, seeing as it's January. So I did have some food. I told him earlier I was fasting, but the truth is I snuck in something. And she was talking to me as I chewed away on my very bad food. And the conversation completely revolved around how are we going to present this value add, that I can take this through not marketing people, but through the business people that are actually evaluating whether she should get the budget for next year. And so anything that you, Fredrik, and your team, or me as a partner can do to make that marketing leader look good and keep them looking, that's why you will keep being hired, because we make them look great and we get them promoted and because we're delivering for the business. So that's why when I first spoke to you, I thought, yeah, there's definitely, we need to talk more about this subject in the industry.
Yeah, and I think you nail it there, because I think, again, going back to the isolated thing, agencies are measured on, hey, you get a target. Here is the ROAS revenue target. Here is a budget. Hit that, and we are really happy. That is the goal. And then the company come back a quarter later and say, hey, we use so much ad spend and we had less profit than last month, or we were losing money. What the hell is going on? How should the agency ever act on something they don't have access to? And how should they act on it when even the business only get that data back a quarter later? So the point is also, if both parties have access to that data, not only can they make sure bad stuff doesn't happen like in my story, but also missed opportunities. If you're seeing in Corona time there, oh my God, this is going fantastic. Everyone were really careful in the start. This is going fantastic. We're making more money than ever. Let's go and use all the ad spend or all the spend we can get. Also acting on those opportunities, that's just as a bigger part as actually losing. But how can you act as an agency if you don't get access to it? And how can you get access to it when the financial team first have it a quarter later? So it needs to be there in real time.
So with all of that in mind, when you're talking and your team are talking to your agency partners, and you've obviously got a lot of contact both at agency level but also direct into brands, so you've got the measure of both. If there was sort of a few top things that you think that our listeners could, we've gone in deep on some of that stuff, but if we can come out a bit and say, What's the handful of things that I could start doing to start creating a culture where ProAs could be the end result of that, rather than just saying, buy my buy Pro? What is there any advice you could give? A few tips that we could take away?
I think it starts by looking at not only marketing channels, but looking at what have actually happened. If we're talking e-commerce, it could also be travel and so on. But let's just take e-commerce as an example. Starting by measuring at what is the total number of conversions we had here? What is that revenue? The gross profit can be calculated. You can start by just getting some more frequent averages and trying to not just use something as I did that was a year old, trying to calculate that, pull in the real ad spend, because that one is always real from that from the channels. Looking at the contribution margin, maybe it's not as accurate as if you're calculating every single order, but you get an idea. So you know that you can scale. And that's just like, if you're seeing that contribution margin going up, that's an indicator that things are going the right way. If that just, and you're pushing more ad spend on TikTok or Meta and it's just going down, that's probably likely that it's not going the right direction, unless you're working towards getting new customers. But that's, again, trying to measure how many new and existing customers are actually coming into the business, not what the ad channels are telling you, but is this a new customer? Is it not a new customer? Could we maybe make some small calculations of how much do we actually make from a new customer coming in the first 3 months or 6 months? So maybe it's okay to go a little bit more aggressive if we can actually see in those numbers that new customers are trending in a positive way. Stuff like that is a really good way to start, because it's very easy to convince the finance team to get some kind of feed where you can actually feed those real cost data in, if you actually begin measuring it. And I know that they love it. They love it.
And I think a great way to do that is with them. Is rather than sit in isolation, let's start breaking down these silos. And if you're in a huge organization, that can sometimes be hard. If you're in anything under 100 people, 200 people, getting access to the FD or one of the finance team and going, I've been looking at some interesting numbers. Can I just sit down with you and can we have a look at these together? The difference that makes of their perception of you and marketing and your budgets alone. It's not even a political play. It's a good idea. It's a human thing to do. And you never know, they might give you that missing bit of information that actually lets you move forward with what you're doing. I think you're bang on. Just starting to be more analytical about those points is key. So if we think about one of the other things I always like to ask people, if there was something in their life, a bit of advice, we've talked about a lesson you've learned the hard way. I mean, I think
that's your numbers.
That's lived experience. Yeah, but is there something when you were coming through those businesses, someone you've worked with, or something that really sticks out that culturally you live your life by a bit, or a bit of advice you can pass on to someone that's stuck?
There's always so much advice, but what I probably learned beside know your numbers is focus, because I've had so many companies, and some of them have, I believe myself, been really good ideas, but they have never had the chance to really get. I hope so, but they have never really had the chance to go out and live, because things take longer than you expect. You expect that sales is up in 1 year; it takes 2 years, and sometimes you're juggling with 2 or 3 businesses at the same time. I've done that many times, but I'm no Elon Musk. Not everyone can do that. I believe a lot in focus, because it takes longer than you expect. But whenever I really focus,
do you mean knowing what to say no to? Do you mean focusing down, because I'm a creative director, I'm paid to have lots of ideas, and I think all of them are absolutely incredible, which is bollocks. They're not all absolutely, they can't all be winners, but you try and have more good ideas than bad, but certainly developing them into something great. You can't develop all of them in. So Have you learned how to say no to, and how does that manifest it? Do you run your diary and calendar in a certain way? You said yes to this podcast, so obviously
I did. That's a part of my job, to get the word out there, because that's
That's
essentially
part of the
what I say.
focus.
That's a part of the focus, to get the word out there as much as possible. The more people who knows about this, the more people that actually understand the problem, then it's really hard to go back on revenue once you actually see how confusing and ridiculous it is what we
Yeah.
have just been doing, because it's a lot of money we're using. But in terms of focus, it's just when you're an entrepreneur getting a huge amount of ideas, being that, that squirrel that is just jumping on everything that seems great, but just like trying to focus on getting those good ideas and structure them within what you're actually doing. That have helped my personal.
I think it's
Yeah.
good advice. Aside from running an agency and doing this, I have a side hustle, which is an innovation network, and it exists to try and help innovators and entrepreneurs get ideas off the ground. And one of the observations we've made after doing this for eight years and listening to pitch after pitch and sort of Dragon's Den style pitching and amazing ideas, all sorts of brilliant things, we connect the funding and the finance to them. But one of the things I've noticed is that people have forgotten that innovation only exists if it drives value. It's just noise. If there's a million ideas we can come up with, but unless we can connect it with a value add, and that's where often people aren't focused enough to go that last mile. So we come up with an idea, whether it's a marketing idea, an e-commerce idea, whatever it is, but there's very few people, and you need to surround yourself with different types of people, because you might have one piece of that puzzle. Mine is the beginning. I'm great at starting, but that piece that derives that last mile of value, often we do need to pull other people around us and bring them in. So I guess one of the things I'd be interested in is you can't do all this alone, and you're now scaling to a point where, it would be unfair of us to sort of present it as anything else. I mean, you started by saying you get a consultant in, they give you a prototype, you start working. What's your take on people, and how do you get the right people around you to build the type of success that you're aiming for, Fredrik?
Yeah. So the first year was just myself and that consultant, and that's also like, it's so cliche, the grinding, but keep on doing it, and I think not giving up when it seems hard, because it is hard, and when things are not working, that's where in the past I just jump to the next new idea because this is not working.
Too hard.
Too hard. I just jump, but sticking to it. But I think it's a lot about getting people into the idea. Seeing that vision, seeing the mission of getting this out here, we are actually making a difference. And if you find the right talent, and maybe they're also, to start with, a little bit entrepreneurial, but if you can get them to be entrepreneurial inside the business and actually go out and be a generalist in the start, what is changing now in the company is it's much more specialized. But in the start, the people needed to be much more generalists.
So when they join you, you want them to have that broad view, but then they find their lane that they're going to sort of start to specialize
exactly
in.
They need to do customer service. Sometimes they need to do a sales call. They maybe need to figure out something that is not working and talk to a developer, but doing those things. But as we go, it's much more specialized, and this person is super great at customer support, or this person is super great at making agency partnerships, or this developer is great at this little thing but is the best talent for this little thing, and that's course
it's one of the hardest things. And the longer I've been doing it, I'm still way below where I'd like to be in this skill set, but actually being able to pick up and support and enthuse those people where they are stronger in those spaces. So it's sometimes you sort of try and puts people in boxes, and the reality is people change. And I've worked with people for a long period of time, and they started in one role, and bit by bit, organically, they flow into this other space. But certainly I feel your challenge, because the people part of it is both the most wonderful part of it and also the hardest bit to get right.
Yeah,
for
definitely. And but it's also, I think that if you're starting out, I think I took and sold the first 300 customers and onboarded them myself and took all of the support. I did so many roles at the start, but when a new person come on the team and they see that the founder is not afraid of doing these things, then it goes. But one of the things that was really hard for me was because I was so busy doing these things and they were so important
You
to
didn't
answer
do
all
the other
mails like this.
stuff. You didn't do the other
I
stuff.
didn't do the other stuff, and it was really hard to find the time to actually sit down and train the next person. So it was important for me to find some people. That was the people who really worked out and are still here in the company, was the ones that could actually shadow me and learn from me without me teaching them, just seeing what I did and then take it from there, because I didn't have time to teach them up and do a proper onboarding as people expect in most companies. But just being like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was talking
sponge.
to someone that's hopefully going to be a guest on the UnEDited show soon, who is in a similar but very different space. It's a technology space where it's a global cruise product that basically works with cruise operators and pulls data in and pulls it around. But we were talking briefly this morning about just how it changes, where at the beginning you have to be the expert about everything. And then suddenly one day you realize you know less than the expert sitting next to you. And it's both something you grieve and you've lost that, but also it's the most releasing and wonderful experience to know that you're surrounded by people that understand where you're heading, want to be part of the puzzle. And I'm certainly feeling that now in my business. So it's great that you are too. And it's not an easy thing to do. So, okay. Let's round off, but where next for Profit Metrics? How do we get involved? What if we're interested in what we've heard about? How do we start exploring it? What are your hopes? What are your dreams next? Tell us.
Take action. It isn't as hard and difficult as it seems, because that data we were talking about, that cost data, it's much more structured, and it is in every business, because there is purchasing systems and so on that have those cost of goods. So it's not very hard, and I would say a fair big amount of e-commerce business out there already have the cost data in their Shopify or the Magento or whatever platform they're using. So it is very easy. The way we have structured it is get a demo, aligns people. Now we're getting started. Book an onboarding afterwards where we say click on this button, and within 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you're all set up, and then you're good to go. And we have no long-term contracts, and we do that simply just to give a chance to see the value, because it's super hard to say if you're increasing your profit by 10 or 15% or whatever happens there, but just seeing the value of getting that transparency, that's often where the change happen. And we, on a business side, want to just have the businesses
so we're looking for as many agency groups, businesses, just to try this.
Yeah.
And if you're happy, Fredrik, you're going to give us some links that will be in the show details below here, which allow any of your listeners to jump on, have a little go, have a call with the guys and understand what it's about. There's no commitment. You can just start exploring it in that way. But if you do nothing else after listening to this, I definitely would go and interrogate your data that's coming from your e-commerce. And I'll definitely start thinking differently, even if you're not in e-commerce, as a marketing leader, about how are you actually proving, showing value in the language that the business and the FD will really understand. And I think we can all take something from that, whether we're e-commerce or a creative director like me. Cool. Fredrik, I want to give a huge thank you for joining me today. Thanks for being part of the UnEDited show. And I hope we speak again soon. Thank you.
Speak soon. Thank you for your time.
That's a wrap on another episode of UnEDited. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications so you never miss an episode. Find all of our updates on your favourite social media and podcast platforms. Just search for the UnEDited podcast.